freezing.
You're cold? Oh.
Well, so I've been discovering that halfway through the day I start feeling a little like jittery, and so I've been forced to run in the evenings just to like sweat out that jitteriness. And I'm starting to think it's the having 2 cups of coffee on basically an empty stomach and then eating a very small lunch. And so this morning literally did hot water with creamer in it, because the thing I like about the coffee is my peppermint creamer.
Oh.
And so I tried that. It was absolutely terrible. And so I didn't have a second mug. So all I've had since I woke up is a cup of hot water with creamer in it. And I'm quite cold. I have a jacket, but it's too dark for the background. Okay. So that's why I have to wear the red. Okay.
That'll work.
So you were telling me you were voting last week and you ran into a family friend of ours.
Yes, I was actually standing in a long line. We went to vote last week, and I ran into a friend, and he was asking me what I was up to. I was telling him that, and he was filling me in on what was going on with him. But he came back around to the things that I was talking about, and he said, and he looked at me and he said, Mike, I don't want you to take this wrong, but I'm kind of jealous of you. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, like you found something with Strong Catholic Dad that you're really passionate about and driven to go and make a difference. He's like, I don't have that. Like I'm working, I'm providing for my family, and that's all good. But I really wish that I had something that I was chasing after with the same zeal that you have. And that brought up a really good point of like, what are we living for? What is, especially in this particular case, it's, during my work time, what's the important thing that I'm going to focus on? And if I'm in a situation, because I've been in situations of that before in my life where I was working, I was questioned, like, what am I doing? What am I here for? Sometimes it's painful. We don't want to ask that question because we know the answer. It's like, I'm not happy with where I'm at right now.
I was part of a men's group back when I was living in Indianapolis, and this was 4 or 5 years ago now. I was fairly new in my film company and fully on fire with it. And it just blew my mind. Every single other guy in that group was doing a job that paid the bills. Mm-hmm. And like some of them were flat out miserable. Like every week we'd say, hey, what's the update for this week? Oh, I hate my job. It's this, and that. I'm like, well, then why don't you quit? Yeah. Well, I don't know where else I would go. It pays good,
Right.
I can't afford that. And that stands in, if you're going to spend a third of your day, 5 days a week on something, mm-hmm. you would hope that thing would be something where you could be fully alive with that work. But I know that, you for the first, 8-9 years of your working life were doing something that I guess you liked, but it was long hours and not something you were crazy passionate about. You were in sales, and you said before you got your job in sales that you would never get a job in sales. So I don't want to hear some story about how that was your favorite thing ever.
Yeah. No, gosh, there's an interesting combination between being dutiful and doing what you need to do to pay the bills, and then also still listening to like what God is teaching me through this, because God promises us the cross. If you love me, take up your cross and follow me. But then there's this other side of things where God clearly says that He came to give us the abundant life. So it's like the cross and the abundant life, the cross and the abundant life. And then that's the challenge. So I go back to when I started in sales, which I didn't realize it was a sales job when I started into it, which is how I launched into it, is because I thought it was a telephone service job. And I hated it. Actually, I was dreading going to work every day. And my poor wife, on Sundays, I would stop eating like right after noon, and I usually wouldn't eat dinner. And she's like, what's wrong? And I was like, my stomach is in knots. I have to go back to that job on Monday. And so it was terrible. But what was interesting, I stayed with that job for, it was probably around 9 years. And what happened through it, there were ups and downs where there were many times in the beginning that I hated it. Yet the evidence of circumstance was that is what I needed to be doing at the time. I did have a resume together. I was putting it out to see what other things would come together. God didn't show me another door to go through. So the lesson in that is you've got to be open if there's another door that God's opening up. And at the time, He didn't open up another door. I was offered a full-blown commission job that I mean, it's a funny story because I swore I wasn't going to take the job. I went up, interviewed, did well, came back, and as I was driving back, I was depressed because I thought they're going to offer me this job and I don't want this job. And I drove out literally from beneath a bank of clouds, and the sun was shining gloriously. And it just occurred to me, it's like, this is my life. I don't have to do this job. And so the rest of the drive home, I was so happy. And I got back, saw my wife, Maria, and she said, how'd it go? I said, it went great. And she's like, wow, you seem enthusiastic. I said, I am enthusiastic. And she said, so you can take the job? I'm like, no, that's what I'm enthusiastic about is this is my life and I don't have to do the sales job. And she's like, well, wait a second. And so it turned into another conversation. They didn't offer me the job for about 3 months. And 2 to 3 months later, they came down to my office to offer me the job. And when the manager showed up, she said, Michael, I'd like to take you out for lunch. And I said, okay. And she said, there's actually some other people in the office who are interested in coming up to this advancement office too. We'll all go out together. And I said, sure. So we went out to lunch together. And the other people were so excited about the type of job that I was getting that they talked to this manager the whole time. At the end of lunch, we hadn't spoken much at all. The manager said, hey, why don't we drive in the car back to the office together? And I said, okay. And so we're in the car and she gets off on a tangent. She starts talking about something completely different. We get back to the office. I go sit down at my desk, call Maria, and she's like, okay, so what happened? And she said, you turned down the job, right? And I said, you know what? It was really weird. She never offered me the job. And Maria was like, what are you talking about? I said, it was weird, whatever. And I said, but I have to tell her no, because there's no way I'm not taking the job. 2 hours later, it just so happened that I had a great day. The afternoon went well. I was in a kind of a happy-go-lucky mode. She pulled me into the conference room and said, hey, Michael, I don't know what happened at lunch. I had intended to ask you something, didn't get the chance to. You interviewed great. We'd love to offer you the job up north. And I said, and this voice actually eerily similar to my own said, sure. And I remember thinking, was that just me? Did I just say that? And this is a great example. And I did. I accepted the job. I called Maria and I said, hey, they offered me the job. And she said, and you said no. And I said, no, I took it. She said, what are you talking about? And I said, I don't know. I just thought, what the heck, go for it. And so I look at that as how God just does a phenomenal job. If He kept waiting until the moment that I was actually open to saying yes, and I said yes. I went up, took that job, and I hated it for at least, probably for 9 months. And I was trying to interview for other jobs. And what happened is, at some point, I was at this breaking point where I was having a tough time, and something shifted where I continued to do what they taught me to do. And I just got this break, and I was selling in this particular market, and I started getting these sales that had actually already been made by somebody else, and they were just given to me, and I hadn't really worked for them. And so I calmed down because I wasn't worried about how to pay the bills, because I had this these sales again that I hadn't earned. And the upshot of that is, as I wasn't so freaked out about what I was doing, all those different things that I had learned for the past year and a half started to come home to roost, and I actually got better at it. And then I started to succeed on my own. I actually started doing pretty well. At that point, I was starting to enjoy the job. So this job I was trying to get the heck out of for a year and a half, I started to enjoy. And I think, God, I love the idea of what's the evidence of circumstance? What's happening today? Because I needed to carry the cross enough and not just throw it off because okay, I shouldn't be doing this anymore, until there was another door to open. In this case, the door that kept opening was staying in the same job. And I went through ups and downs with that job, and actually what that turned, I ended up being the top salesperson at the end of that year that had begun when I got that give me market, and then it's I started doing better and better, and I got promoted from there. But I think the lesson in that is there was a lot of both carrying the cross and then saying, Lord, I want my heart to be alive. And there were times where it came alive in that job when I had enough skill to not be freaked out about providing. And then I found out ways that I was helping my customers because I was selling advertising. And there were some big wins where there's some businesses that I helped. And then the business, like I would check in on them on the next year and they're like, oh, Michael, we made $30,000 off of that, $5,000 ad that you sold us. I was like, I tried not to look too surprised. I was like, really? Tell me about it. And they give me the backstory so it built my confidence. So there was a real value in sticking it out, but the whole time I had to be listening to say, is this the direction that you want me to go? Because the day did come where I was consistently doing really well, and I had won lots of awards. I was making good money, but deep down in my heart, I was like, I'm not at peace. It's not enough for me to make a lot of money. It's not enough for me to. Even though that was good and it was paying our bills, and then some. We were saving and everything. But I felt in my heart that if I died tomorrow and I've helped a lot of these businesses make money and do well, that's good. But I feel like I'm being called to something more, and something different.
You said early, it's on your bio on the Strong Catholic Dad website. You said early on to Mom that you wanted to teach the faith to people. Mm-hmm. Right. And at that point she said, what would you say? Right. But still that desire was there from early on.
Right. Yeah, and that was present. And actually what started to happen, I'm glad you brought that up. There were many times in the job that there was this opportunity because I really was focused in on, the bottom line is at the end of time, there are two places you can be, heaven and hell. And I was like, I want to go to heaven. And there's one way to get there, Jesus Christ and what he teaches. And he says, take up your cross, follow the 10 commandments, love me, love your neighbors yourself. And so I was doing my best to love my neighbor as myself through my job. And so when I was selling advertising, I was telling people, I don't think you should buy this ad over here, even though I think it'll make me money. I don't think it'll make you money. And people started to catch on the fact that I was really trying to do what was right by them. And so then they started to trust me, and which was great because there were other times. There was people. One particular guy that I remember is that he said the only reason I bought is because I was convinced that you were sincere and you really believed in what you were telling me. And when I came back to him the next year, and I sold him Yellow Page advertising in the phone book, and he's just like, I made a bundle. He's like, thank you so much. And he said, again, I was buying your confidence, and that you were I could tell you were a trustworthy person. So, but what happened in these situations, which I really relished, is that there were a lot of side conversations that would go into the meaning of life and why we're here, and what. They would be faith conversations, and oftentimes people say, they kind of almost whisper, what denomination are you? Are you Christian? Or are you because there's something different about you? And so I was realizing that there was an advantage to my job, is that I was able to connect with people in ways we never would have had that conversation if outside of the fact that we had to be together for business to get something done. So that was a great opportunity. And I did have this desire to be like, I don't even want to talk about the business stuff anymore. Let's talk about your family, your kids, your faith. Where are you going to be? Because we kept talking, well, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? What's your plans for this business? I want to say, what's the plan for your life? What's your million-year plan? So that was lighting up my heart. That's what I wanted to talk about. And so it was funny when Maria, when you repeated what she said, you were a lot nicer. She just said what would you have to say? You don't know the faith very well. I said, I don't know, but I'd want to talk about, what's really important. So, but God he did two things through that. One is he never let that desire die. It continued to be stoked where I wanted to do that more and more. And then secondly, which I could see with hindsight, is I was building the skills to be able to talk with people with more confidence and to be able to listen better. So to listen and to respond. And I had a prayer experience at some point where I was complaining to God, and I was just like, Lord, well, why do you have me in the sales job? And it was late at night. I was driving home, and And I got the impression that our Lord said, well, like, because, this is where I want you. I was like, I know you get what you want, but like, why? Like, why am I here? And I got the impression that he said, and I didn't hear audible. It's just the thought that entered my mind, which wasn't the thought that I would have had on my own. It just like came into my mind was, I want you to sell me. And I remember just stopping at the time like, oh, like I wasn't thinking that. And wow, if that's what you're doing, then I'll learn what I need to with sales to understand, and I learned that the root of the word sales is to serve, and you really serve well. When you sell well, you serve the person. So it became this foundation for what I did next. But it was that constant drawing of my heart. And so he was giving me the opportunity to talk about really important things with people and still make money, build skill, and then move on to where, into further jobs that I was able to do more with the faith. Not right away, but it happened eventually.
The thing that really strikes me about hearing the story laid out that way, which I haven't heard before, is that you did sales from 92, 93 until 2000, and then you sold rent-to-own properties from 2000, 2001 until you still have some now, but full-time until 2008. And then you were working with another nonprofit from 2008 until 2018. And so kind of the fruition of that desire on your heart to teach the faith didn't really meet its full realization until 20 how many years after you started working, Right. And it's funny because as a young person, as someone who's been working for 10 years now, straight out of high school, when I was in year 2, I was like, if I haven't made a movie in 3 years, I failed.
That was your goal.
And it's
to be a
filmmaker.
Right.
Yeah. And if I haven't made a movie in three years, like I failed. Right. And when that 3 years passed, and then we were 2 years past that and 3 years past that, I started looking back and be like, oh my gosh, like none of this is planning out the way that I would have written it. Mm-hmm. Right. I would have. The youngest director to ever win an Oscar is Damien Chazelle, and he was 32. And I'm 4 years away from that. It's probably not going to happen. And I'm starting to realize, like, okay, this is not the script I would have written. And so it's beautiful to hear this idea that the desire you had on your heart wasn't backed up with the skills because you needed to develop those skills. Mm-hmm. You had to put in the hours doing the thing that was miserable. And so I think that, to me, that gives me a lot of hope of realizing that if you spend the moment by moment, if you fulfill the responsibility of your daily duty that God's put in front of you, and you're asking on a daily basis what I'm supposed to be doing, the answer today might not be the thing that really fulfills the desire of your heart.
Right.
But it is something, because of God's perfect plan, that inevitably you're going to look back and say, that's why that happened.
Yeah.
But I actually want to flip this a little bit, because I think that something that I've seen in a lot of, we all know parents where the husband spends most of his time working, and that is the thing that really does fulfill the desire of his heart. But he's a husband and a father. And as you've said before, your priorities should be God, spouse, family, and then work.
Yeah.
What do you do when the desire of your heart, and you've experienced this with ministry, when it is fulfilled by the work, but you also have these other responsibilities that maybe on the surface don't seem nearly as fulfilling? How do you keep those priorities in order when the priorities don't reflect kind of your internal desires?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer is the same thing that I did back when I hated the job, but I needed to put a paycheck, on the table, and say, hey, I made something today. And so what happened is I was living by my priorities then. My priority at that time was I needed to provide for the family, even though I'm not doing something that fills my heart. Actually, it's turning my stomach. I'm feeling ill doing this work. And so what I didn't do is I didn't just dump out and say, I hate this, I quit. And it's, sometimes somebody gets to the point where that's what they need to say. But, I didn't get to that point. I did not like it. I hated it. But in time, it grew on me. But from a practical standpoint, I was still living according to the priority of God, what do I need to be doing? What do I need to be doing for you, for Maria, for the kids? And so the same thing happens is that when I had to trust that God was going to fulfill me, even though the work was stinky, I also have to trust that when it's stinky to follow God and take prayer time when I'd rather be making another sale, when it's stinky to go do something with my wife when, gosh, there's an opportunity for me to excel over here with this, if I meet with this guy over here, we can make a connection and I can grow the business even more. Again, I have to die to myself. That's the cross side of it, where it's just like, you know what? No, my wife comes before this other business thing that's extra. Work that in during the business day, fine. But after that, it's a time I'm going to trust you, Lord, that you're still going to fulfill the desires of my heart within the confines of your priorities. And that's the summary. It's like trusting that God will fulfill us as much as we get fulfilled in this lifetime within the confines of his priorities. And that's what eventually happened. So when I stuck to his priority of really, of going to work when I didn't want to, then he began to actually fulfill me through that job somewhat, which was amazing. He's filled me with skills during that time. I actually began to enjoy the job, and I got a lot of the other stuff that I was hoping for in terms of meaning out of that job. And then when it shifted to where I was, like even now, where there's times where there's things that I really enjoy in my work, and I have to die to myself and say, yeah, I can get the fulfillment that you're giving me, Lord, within the confines, because growing up, Maria and I, we set a limit and said at 6:00, and oftentimes I was working from home, like I needed to walk away from my computer and say, okay, done. And there's times it would go to 6:01, 6:02, 6:03, and there'd be a little child coming to my office. Come on, Dad, it's time. I'm like, oh yes, okay. And I'm trying to break away from the computer. It's like, oh, I just want to get this last thing done. So, it's still hard because it feels if that like getting one more thing done is going to fulfill me. But the grace is living within the priorities, and so that's really the big answer for especially for dads, is to say, if you live within those priorities, your heart will be fulfilled. Not the instantaneous cotton candy filling, but it'll give you the filling that's really going to give you kind of the meat and potatoes long term, that you can look back and say, yeah, Lord, you really have knocked it out of the ballpark in my life. Thank you.
I think part of what's going on is that we as humans are really, really bad at making judgment calls about what's actually going to make us happy. I think that we're really good at knowing the thing in front of us. Like if I hop over to social media for 10 minutes, then I'm going to feel really good. Or there's that one study they did where they had the kids and they put the marshmallow in front of them and said, you can't have the marshmallow. If you wait, you'll be allowed to have two. And I think that,
don't eat the one in front of you.
Just don't eat the one in front of you.
Minutes.
Yeah, just stare at it. Yeah. And I think that that's like a great representation of the human condition, because like the thing that's right in front of you is always so tantalizing, even if even if when you sat down as your better self and said, God should be my number one priority, because I, as a Catholic, know that when I die, I'm either going to spend all eternity with him or else eternity separated from him. So that should be number one. Even if you sit down and make that decision, when the choice before you is prayer time or sleeping, sleep always feels better. Mm-hmm. It always, in that particular moment, there's never a moment where it's like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to abruptly end my sleep and go do the thing that I decided I was going to do. No, it's like you have to form those habits.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the good news is with that is that, yes, it's hard to do, but the advantage to habits is that habits make things become easier. Never easy, but they're definitely easier. And I'll even, as I've encouraged your siblings when it comes to prayer time, I said, you know what? They know that my normal schedule is that like my alarm goes off at 4:50 in the morning. You back up 10 years and it's like I never would have been doing that. And it's hard to get out of bed. But what I tell your siblings and tell other people is that every day that I do that, it actually gets easier. My body gets used to it. And so when your body gets used to it, there's an advantage to the habit, because it's easier to stay that course and it's not as big of a struggle. In the beginning, it's a huge struggle. So in the same way, putting my prayer time where it needs to be and putting that first, and putting my relationship with Maria where it needs to be, and making sure that I'm taking time with her in the evening so that we can connect with each other, and then going through the kids and making sure I connect with each of them, find out how their day was going, make sure I bless them before they go to bed. It'd be really easy to get off of that, but after doing it, it's easy to stay with it because then there's expectations like, Dad, you didn't bless me yet. Like we didn't, let's do that. So there's there's a beauty in good habits, which is what virtues are. Virtues are just good habits. And they don't feel, they don't feel as meritorious to me after I do them over a long period of time because it's just what I do. But praise God, I'm glad that the things that I'm doing that are good habits are called virtues, and they actually end up feeding me. So that's good news, and that's why I encourage people. It's like even when it's hard in the beginning, when you stay the course, it gets easier.
Speaking of good habits, one of the good habits you do with the family is the See for Yourself guides every Monday night. I'm an expert at transitions. I'm really proud of that one. The See for Yourself approach is a fun and effective way to build fulfilling relationships with your kids while passing on the Catholic faith. The approach is simple. Dad uses viral YouTube videos as icebreakers to capture the attention and imagination of the whole family, and then turns that captivation into lively discussion about life and the faith. We make implementing this approach easy by providing See for Yourself guides. Each of these online guides includes 1 to 3 hand-selected videos along with questions, answers, and activities designed to engage the whole family. So, what was the guide you did with the family this week?
Yeah, so this week we did one on angels. And actually, I just want to back up a quick second. When it comes to this good habit of weekly getting together with the family, it's not just a good thing. It's like God commands it. It's right after the great commandment, love God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And then it says, teach your children diligently at home. Like every day is what it goes on to say. And so it's like, it's not just a good thing like exercise. It's like super necessary. And so we did the one this week on there's a couple on angels. This particular one was really cool because it was about a little boy who had a life after death experience. And so the kids could just identify with him right away because he was a little guy. And when he came back, he knew things that he shouldn't have known. He knew that that he had another sister, that his mom had miscarried, and that there was another sister. He knew that his father had a grandpa that he called Pop. And so what happened is the kids were just listening to his testimony. And at this point, he's probably 10 years old when he's telling about the story, which happened when he was about 3. The kids' eyes are kind of getting big and realizing, wow, it was bolstering their faith because they're realizing that here's a life after death experience from somebody who's very credible. And then within his experience, he talked about these angels who came to him and he wasn't afraid. And so after it was cute, I said, okay, does this prove that angels exist? And all the little younger kids said, oh yeah, like, and they were convinced. And I was like, well, okay. So then I asked my 15-year-old, I said, does it prove? And she's like, well, no, it doesn't really prove. And I said, you're right. This is compelling evidence. It's not absolute proof. And the younger kids were like, well, I think it's absolute proof. I was like, well, it's not. But it's very compelling. We don't know beyond a shadow of a doubt through his story that angels are true. But we do know beyond a shadow of doubt that angels are real because Jesus said so. And so that was good because what was awesome is that after that conversation happened, I just thought, you know what, we just had an experience at home where we're together and they're hearing from me as their dad affirming that angels are absolutely real. So they're hearing it out of my mouth, which, it was on the guide. It said it. I was just reading what it said. So they're hearing it from their dad. And it's also bolstering their faith. They're realizing here's another person who's alive while I'm alive. This isn't a story from 50 years or 2,000 years ago. It's now. So that was pretty delightful, and the kids responded well, and it was a good session.
That's all we have time for today. If you like what you've heard on the podcast, please subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and encourage your friends and family to do the same. If you want to support the work of Strong Catholic Dad, you can become a monthly sponsor for as little as $5 a month. I quit my job back in 2018 to found Strong Catholic Dad, and as of right now, it's not enough to pay the bills. So anything that you can do is appreciated. Until next time, be strong in faith, strong in hope, and strong in love. God bless.